Thank you everybody for joining us. Today we're continuing, if you guys knew Isha IT from last year, we've rebranded as Accorian. By now you're used to us putting on various different webinars across all compliance standards, whether it's SOC 2 or ISO 27001, especially HITRUST. A lot of our previous webinars focused on HITRUST 101 and the early stages of HITRUST. This webinar is brought to you by Dowling, who is our HITRUST guru and HITRUST expert, leading our team and making sure all audit and validation processes work like a Swiss clock. He spent over 30 years in the information technology and security industry, and over the past 7-8 years he has been focused almost exclusively on HITRUST and preparing audits and validations for customers of all sizes. Today's webinar is a little bit different in that we're going to progress beyond why is HITRUST good for me and talk a little bit more about the validation phase itself, while also covering the earlier topics of the benefits of HITRUST and how it differentiates from HIPAA. So without further ado, Sean, over to you.
Thanks, Alan. So in today's presentation, I'm going to look to provide a clarification on HITRUST certification process. We'll also address how Accorian is positioned to help your organization identify and remediate key gaps and prepare for the validated assessment. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, if you're considering HITRUST or you're currently in the early stages of the HITRUST process, we'll be able to give you some answers and then hopefully be able to show you guys where we can assist you in that process. To kick things off, let me introduce you to our organization, Accorian. Shalon went over a little bit about the transition from Esha IT that we went through a couple months ago. But all in all, we were founded about 4 years ago with the focus to assist small to medium-sized organizations in building secure and flexible risk management, compliance, and technology programs, specifically sized to the needs of the client. To highlight our experience, we have worked on over 200 engagements across numerous disciplines since our inception in 2018. Our team averages over 15 years of cyber and technology experience, to include probably right now we're running about 12 to 13 years of direct compliance experience as well. We hold numerous industry and individual certifications in cybersecurity, compliance, and technology, and we are currently working on our CMMC RP certification and credentialing as well. So we are going to be expanding into the federal side of the house as well. We support a myriad of organizations across several industries. Pretty much every industry out there we've worked with an organization at some level with. And we have key initiatives across cybersecurity compliance and security testing. And again, we're really expanding our HITRUST services over the last few months. We've really focused on expanding that out, and we are working with a significant number of clients right now through the different stages of getting HITRUST certified. Our goal is to provide solutions for our clients that allow them to stop compromising between technology necessities and technology budgets. Formed by technology and cybersecurity leadership, we strive to be a full-service technology partner. Our hands-on approach, combined with a global-oriented proven methodology, brings both fiscal value and expertise to our clients. Some of the areas where we focus significantly on would be in security strategy, security compliance, consulting, security testing, and threat management. And then we have a ton of services that we provide under each of those categories to, again, reinforce and build the security state for our client base. Accorian is a global team of experts. We are located, are headquartered in New Jersey. We do have offices in Dubai, and we do have 2 offices in India, in Pune and Bangalore. We do support clients across the globe, so we're not just supporting clients here in the US, but we do have clients in numerous countries as well. Now that I've covered what Accorian is and what we can do, let's look at where HITRUST fits into all of this. Experienced security professionals at healthcare and life science organizations are very familiar with HIPAA and the baseline requirements that go along with that. However, these requirements are often characterized by vague verbiage and subjective to interpretations, leaving organizations perplexed by the challenge and deciding which action satisfies or appropriate level of security and privacy protection for PHI is required. Left unaddressed, this challenge can leave critical systems without essential administrative, physical, technical, and organizational safeguards. So what does that mean? Here comes HITRUST with what they have developed to be their CSF, which will cover a lot of details in detail what that means. HITRUST, comes in the necessary actionable roadmap for organizations that process, transmit, and store private health information. HITRUST's Common Security Framework, or the CSF, as I mentioned, was developed by IT and healthcare professionals to provide a highly prescriptive framework for managing the security requirements inherent in HIPAA. As such, HITRUST provides a certifiable information security framework that supplements and cross-references existing globally recognized standards, regulations, and business requirements with healthcare industry insight and best practices to provide a much-needed clarity and consistency across all the organizations. The harmonization of processes allows healthcare and life science organizations and their vendors to conduct a single assessment while meeting the requirements of multiple compliance initiatives. So again, HITRUST is made up of numerous frameworks with the intent of providing as much coverage as they possibly can for healthcare entities. The HITRUST CSF is broken out into 19 different domains, which are aligned with common IT process areas. Instead of creating guidelines that are broad in coverage, the HITRUST CSF created specialized domains and controls. By being specific, it becomes easier to identify and pinpoint problems. It is essential to quickly correct information security systems when problems and incidents happen. Overall, the HITRUST CSF comprises the 19 domains that rely on precision when targeting data protection. These 19 domains are broken into 135 base security controls and 14 privacy controls that can be mapped back to multiple domains. Controls are then broken down into individual control requirements, which we'll cover later. The number of controls included in an organization's assessment is driven by the scoping factors. Each organization must scope its MyCSF object with the specific factors pertaining to their organization. Scoping consists of answering a variety of questions that are used to determine how many controls are in scope for an assessment. The categories of these questions include assessment options. Is the assessment being submitted for certification? Do you only want the minimum control requirements for certification? Do you want to include privacy controls? Remember, I said that there were 14 baseline privacy controls that are included in every assessment, but you can expand that out to cover additional privacy requirements. And this is key for covered entities and electronic health record owners. But also if you're doing PCI or you're doing online processing, there's additional privacy controls that you may want to consider when looking at that scope. The MyCSF scoping also looks at the systems and facilities included in the scope of the assessment. So we are going to specifically look at what applications that you're going to include in this process, and then your actual physical locations. So we want to make sure that we identify who does what, who has access to what, and where they access it from. We'll look at your organizational type, your infrastructure, and the geographical information as well. So that is key into determining your scope. We'll get into technical factors, and these are some of the key things that do drive the number of controls that are assigned to you. We'll walk through a little example here shortly. But we will look at the number of records, users, and the number of daily transactions that your organization conducts, and then that also will feed into the type of controls and the number of controls that you have to work with. And then we'll look at the regulatory factors that your organization has to adhere to. And in many cases, a lot of these only apply to the regulatory factors that you have to report back to, not necessarily if you're doing business in a state or you're outside the continental US. But if you have to report to these, then we will look at those regulatory factors and then add those additional controls in. And they would include things like state and federal, regional factors, international things like GDPR and so forth. And then in the current version 9.4 HIPAA, they have broken out specific levels within HIPAA that you can include in there, where we want to make sure that we're including controls for breach notification, privacy, and security rules. So it is very prescriptive. It does give us a lot of capability to manipulate a little bit with what that assessment's going to look like, and then also narrow it down to making sure that we are working with specifically what your organization wants to have included in the scope of the assessment. The largest driving factor in the scope is the number of sensitive records, as I mentioned. For healthcare organizations, this is defined as the number of breach notification letters which would need to be sent out in the event of a catastrophic breach. This is not discrete pieces of data, but this is basically who we have to contact if something bad happened. And again, for an example, as a rough estimate, we see the number of control requirements similar to the following. If you have under 10 million records, we can expect your control count to be, under the 300 control mark. 10 to 60 million records, your assessment will be roughly around the 375 control mark, and then anything over 60 million, we can expect to see it at greater than 450. And this is in combination to some of those other scoping factors that we were talking about. So this would just be the baseline controls that would come in, based off of the number of records, and then also add in the scoping factors for like any regulatory controls or anything specific that we identified in the additional scoping questions. These totals combined with the other scoping factors will determine the total number of controls in each domain that your organization will be assigned. So if you had any questions about how they go through this process, this is pretty much the core to how they determine what controls get assigned to you. As we've discussed, scoping is a key to determining the size and complexity of your assessment. During the initial discovery phase, which we'll talk about in detail shortly, one of our HITRUST leads will walk you through a scoping exercise to ensure that the appropriate scope has been determined. HITRUST requires that your organization be assessed against all 19 domains. It's not selective. What controls are assigned to you, you will have to be responsible for addressing. The assigned controls are broken up into the associated domains, and the assessor will track your score by each control and domain. To achieve the HITRUST CSF certification, each domain must score a minimum of 62%. This is the aggregate score from all controls in each specific domain. Something to understand is for any control scoring less than a 72, a corrective action plan will be assigned. This is a self-described and design plan that you will work with to ensure how you're going to remediate whatever issue that was. If you needed to implement MFA and you haven't completed that process, we would build a plan that we would then put into the MyCSF tool that says, here's our key milestones over the next 2 years to complete the MFA implementation process. During your interim year, we would be required to report back to HITRUST the progress that you are making with that plan. And then of course, any modifications we would have to go through accordingly. Each control will be scored against the 5 maturity levels. These levels have been weighted by HITRUST to ensure proper adherence is met. And we'll cover a lot more detail with these later on, but policy, procedure, implementation, and measured and managed are the 4 maturity levels. Policy accounts for 15%, procedures account for 20%, implementation accounts for 40%, and then measured and managed, measured is 10 and managed is 15. One note is it's recommended organizations going through the HITRUST certification program for the first time only concentrate on the first 3 maturity levels: policy, procedure, and implementation. This will allow your organization to score up to 75% in each domain and achieve a passing score without having to focus on the advanced, measured, and managed levels. Just so you understand, measured and managed maturity levels intertwine because of their high interrelations. Thus, these must be continuously monitored for these maturity levels. It's a much more advanced, level within your organization once you've got it implemented. And we can work through the details about that and where that would apply. And just so you know, to show that a domain is measured and managed, and there's sufficient, and that we have to show sufficient documentation with that. So again, it would require additional effort, not only for your organization to implement at that level, but also for us to validate at that level. So the good news is these 2 maturity levels are not strictly needed in HITRUST certifications, and are usually left out, especially during those first couple of cycles of going through a HITRUST certification. And then also a couple of things we'll talk about the reports with the 2 separate types of assessments. There's 2 basic reports that we're looking for, 2 basic paths we're looking for. The early phases of this, the self-assessment or the readiness assessment, which is what it's called now. This does not require an assessor firm. This is something that you can do in-house. We do work with you through this process, and in many cases, we'll help you guys through this during our discovery phase. But this is basically just for you to walk through a mock assessment with your assigned controls, score yourself on where you feel that you are with each one of these, and then be able to basically identify a gap analysis out of that and determine what your remediation is going to be. Once you go through that process, HITRUST does not audit this report. They don't really do anything with it other than issue a report stating that you conducted a readiness assessment and that your scores and input have been recorded. This report is designed to identify deficiencies in your information security management program, and again, to allow you time to remediate prior to conducting a full validated assessment. The validated assessment, this does require an assessor firm to conduct. So you must engage with an organization like Accorian to go through the validated assessment portion of this. HITRUST will audit and determine if a certification has been achieved based on the assessor's reviews, scoring, and the details provided. They do randomly go through and pick controls from each domain to review. They will validate the testing that the assessor went through. They'll review documentation. They'll look at the sample sets that we collected and validate whether or not that they agree with our assessment that you achieved whatever score was assigned based off of the maturity level. Some of the benefits of HITRUST, of attaining HITRUST certification, it's an important way to communicate that information security and privacy is both a necessity and a priority to your organization. It's a commitment that it's recognized by business partners, third-party companies, and regulatory agencies. Many organizations, and I'm sure you're aware, have to report up and are under the guides of a much larger organization that may be requiring you to go through this. Some of the great things about having HITRUST is, it's going to reduce the chances of security breach or incidents. So adherence would reduce this from happening, or the opportunities from this from happening, and it would ultimately save time, cost and breaches, both directly and indirectly. So there would be a significant amount of savings on the tail end of this, not having to go through any type of a breach process. Systematic identification helps in the identification of your most important assets, critical workflows, risks, vulnerabilities, and threats, or basically making sure that all those categories that we talked about within your information security program not only are covered but have been reviewed and tested and do meet the standards within what the HITRUST requirements and the industry require. Forging security in your employees, of course, this is going to make your employee area much stronger. Employees are the weakest link within the security program, and this would help reinforce that. This does provide a structured program, and again, HITRUST is a maturity-based program as opposed to other frameworks like NIST or SOC, which are basically stake in the sand or time-based. At the current time, this is where you stood. HITRUST is looking from a maturity standpoint and having you build your maturity in your security program up. See, health security across the organization, ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability is in place for your PHI. And then probably another big one here, and a lot of organizations do use this, is brand reputation. Once you go through this process, you do get the ability to display and inform in other organizations that you are HITRUST certified. And that does help with your sales process and securing additional work from other organizations that may be looking for that. All right, so now that we've have a better understanding of HITRUST and the benefits of achieving the HITRUST CSF certification, let's walk through and discuss how Accorion's approach is crucial in preparing your organization for the validated assessment. Myself and my staff, we've worked very hard to develop and streamline a methodology to assist organizations with their cyber risk programs that are in sync with the HITRUST CSF certification requirements. Our pre-certification services help you fully understand and gain clarity into the HITRUST CSF lifecycle so that you can reduce time, cost, resources, and prepare your organization for success. And this is not only just getting through the certification process, but also preparing your organization to identify vulnerabilities and fend off any types of attacks or issues that may arise from not being prepared. The Accorian approach is basically broken into 3 distinct phases. We have discovery, we have our roadmap to execution, and our validated assessment. We'll walk through each one of these briefly. But one of the things to understand is, especially, our discovery is just trying to figure out where you guys are. Roadmap is, this area is comprised of optional services that are designed to expedite remediation of your gaps. So depending on what you've identified, as a deficiency, we will work with you to help, help identify how you're going to remediate that. So let's take a look at each one of these phases from a high level. In phase 1, or discovery phase, this is where we're going to determine what's in scope for your validated assessment. We will review your environment, we'll look at your risk, and we'll also review any contractual obligations that you might have, whether it be from a partner, a provider, a business associate, a vendor, whatever it might be. We're going to build a test object in HITRUST MyCSF tool to determine the number and type of controls that will be assigned to your organization. We're going to look at your scope. As we talked about earlier, we're going to walk through the individual key considerations in that to determine where you guys fit in each category, and then develop that control list. So we'll actually have the actual control list that you guys will have to use for your validated assessment. We're going to review those controls with the key stakeholders and identify what gaps. We'll ask simple questions to start out with. Do you do it or don't you do it? If you do, let's talk about how you do it. If you don't do it, let's talk about what the impact of not doing it's going to be, and is this a key risk that we need to identify and that ultimately needs to be remediated. We're going to take a look at your policies and procedures to ensure they meet HITRUST control requirements. HITRUST has very detailed prescriptive language that they are looking for within the policies and procedures. Policies must have the control detail stated within it. They also must be reviewed and approved by senior management, and we must clearly demonstrate how you guys have communicated that out to your stakeholders. The other key thing is with your procedures. HITRUST is specifically having the assessors validate whether or not we clearly state what is included in the process, who's responsible for it, when do they do it, and the big one is how do they do it. So we're going to be looking for clear directive steps outlined in each of those processes. So those are things we're going to help you guys with. We have developed templates, we have starter language, we have things that we have worked through over the years to help build and make that process easier. And we have a team in India that specializes in primarily just doing policy and procedure review, updating, and writing. Once we get through all that, we're going to build a project plan. We're going to take all those gaps we've identified. We're going to put those into an overall remediation plan, work with you with what that's going to look like, how long it's going to take you guys to get through that. We'll talk about resource restraints that you might be dealing with, and we'll work through costing with that as well. And then ultimately, we're going to build a timeline out of that that's going to get you into your what we call their steady state. If we're making changes, if you have to change your policies, if there's material changes to your policies, procedures, you've implemented new tools, you've changed your environment significantly, HITRUST requires a incubation period of 90 days. So everything must be in place for at least 90 days prior to starting your validated assessment. So we have to make sure we include that in the timeline, and we'll talk more detail about that here shortly. This process, our discovery phase, on average takes 2 to 3 weeks for us to complete. And again, it's kind of our foundational, here's where you stand today, and then here's where we need to go from here. In phase 2, and again, phase 2 is comprised of mostly optional services. At a bare minimum, we're going to provide weekly, bi-weekly status calls with you as you're going through your remediation processes, just to check in, make sure everything's going well, see if you guys need any additional support in the area. We do provide project management services and consulting services to help dig in a little bit deeper. We can help you drive your team, or if you need to bring contractors in, we can help you identify those contractors. We can work with what their activities are on a day-to-day basis, and keep everything in line with what the project plan says. And then also we can work with you on a consulting basis, interpreting what the HITRUST controls are specifically looking for, how you would have to implement something, configure something, and then ultimately what evidence can be produced out of that. So we're there to assist your organization in the remediation of the identified gaps by providing these optional services. And then ultimately it's to try to expedite the remediation process for you guys. And again, we'll talk about things, policy and procedures, we talked about how we're going to review and write those, work with you guys on that stuff. We can do the supplemental staffing from a technical perspective. We can provide consultancy, vendor recommendation for specific tool sets and processes. And this is beneficial, especially if you're a small, medium-sized organization, you don't have the staff or you don't have the relationships in place to do that. And when we start talking things like you'll see here, MFA, MDM, single sign-on, endpoint control and management, patch management, you name it, all this stuff here. Some of this stuff may be, a bit far-reaching for some organizations that just haven't matured to the level where this has been implemented yet. Additionally, we do have our testing services, our vulnerability testing services, where we have a staff that will do your penetration testing. We have staff that will do your risk assessments. Any type of third-party requirements from a testing perspective, we do have those services, and we will offer those up as well. So ultimately, what we're saying here is, we offer complete customizable solutions based on your needs and based on your budget. So we'll work with you guys again on where you are and what help you're going to need. In our third phase, which is the validated assessment, this is relatively standard across the board. Our validated assessment services, we use a combination of both onshore and offshore resources. This is to ensure quality with reducing cost to you guys. So again, we are trying to leverage our offshore resources to keep the pricing competitive, knowing that in many cases organizations are being forced into having to go down the HITRUST path. And let's face it, HITRUST, if you start looking at this from a bottom line perspective, it can be very expensive. So our validated processes begin with a full review of the scope, assigned controls, and the provided evidence. So again, as we're coming out of that incubation period, we will be working with you guys on the evidence collection, can make sure everything is staged and ready to go. Our validated team, which has to be completely separate from anybody that worked with you on remediation, they'll have to make sure that everything looks copacetic, it's in line with what we're looking for. The assessment team will include an engagement executive, a team lead, and one or multiple, in many cases, probably multiple certified assessors. And they'll be assigned to your assessment, and they'll begin validating by reviewing your population files and selecting samples of additional evidence. So again, a good portion of what HITRUST has the assessors do is to go in and demonstrate how you're being compliant with those controls with each of those implementations that we talked about. So we will have to do sampling of different areas. We'll have to look at numerous documents to support how you guys are executing in your day-to-day processes and ensuring you're addressing vulnerabilities and keeping in line with your information security program. And that also includes a complete validation of your policy and procedure. So remember, we talked about, we're going to help you guys write that stuff, update it, do the things that need to be done with it. Our validation team has to go in to each individual control, identify where it's covered in your policy and procedure, cite that specifically out, and be able to demonstrate, again, those areas we talked about for approvals, communication with stakeholders, and policy and procedure on the who, the when, the where, and the how. Once the PMP review is complete and all evidence requests have been satisfied, the project team will focus on validation of the implementation evidence. And this is kind of the meat of the whole thing. We know the what needs to be done. We know the how you guys do it. Now we got to go back and prove it all. So that's where we're going to be reviewing, those scans, the images, the screenshots, the reports, the logs, whatever it is, depending on what the control is asking for, doing an in-depth deep dive review of each individual control with the supporting evidence. This process will take between 50 to 70 days to complete, depending on the complexity of your organization and the number of controls that are assigned. During this period, the team will work with you guys on uploading evidence, collecting additional evidence if we feel that it's insufficient, or it's not really covering what's being asked for in the control. And then we also will enter the maturity scoring into the HITRUST MyCSF tool, as well as upload the evidence. We'll work with you guys on uploading the evidence as well in the tool. Ultimately, the goal is to get the MyCSF tool fully built out, each control addressed, have the supporting evidence by maturity level loaded and scored. So that's all going to take place during that period with the assessors. Once the validation of the evidence has completed, the project team will send the full assessment to the Accorian quality assurance team for review. HITRUST requires, and this is something they just started about 2 years ago, year and a half, 2 years ago, that we have to perform internal QA, and we actually have to have certified quality assurance individuals on our staff. So once our assessment team has that complete, the QA team will validate a random selection of controls to ensure that evidence and samples meet the HITRUST standards. So again, it's just more or less a sanity check. Have we followed the guidelines within what HITRUST requires, and are we doing our due diligence on your behalf? The QA team will coordinate with the project team for any changes that's required prior to submission. So again, this is kind of our last look at it. Is everything ready to go? Once we get the thumbs up from the QA team, the assessment will be presented back to the engagement executive for submission to HITRUST. There are a few more steps involved in that. There's some additional documents that need to be put together and reviewed prior to this being done, but essentially we're ready to go ahead and get the assessment submitted to HITRUST. Once we get through that process, this is kind of what the timeline is going to look like. So, to get from, hey, I need to do HITRUST to we're submitted, you're going to walk through this process here. And this is kind of based off of where you guys are today. Again, the phase 2 there, the roadmap execution phase, really has significant impact based off of your current maturity level where you guys are with this. But to walk through it quickly, discovery is going to take approximately 2 to 3 weeks. And again, we talked in detail about that. It's really just trying to get those foundational steps and concepts down. Where are you today? The roadmap, depending on what you need to get remediated, the level of effort and resource commitment, this could take approximately 2 to 8 months. If you're very mature and you have resources available, you have a decent sized team that's assigned to getting these things done, you can probably get through it relatively quickly. If you don't have that, we've got to get external resources, or you just can't, get the resources committed to getting this done. It could take a much longer period of time to get that done. So ultimately, though, the goal is to get everything remediated, get everything staged and ready to go, so we can move into that incubation period, or that steady state. Again, that's something that HITRUST requires. If there's been material changes to your documentation and to your implementations. So, it's not something we can negotiate. It's not something we have any control over. And then getting into your validated assessment, depending on the size of the assessment, with the number of controls, the complexity, and the level of evidence that's been provided, on average, it's going to take us 2 to 3 months to get it done. We have 90 days to get that completed. By HITRUST standards, we try to get it done a little bit faster than that, as much as possible. Try to get it done quicker, but in some cases, the complexity of the assessment will dictate how long it's going to take us to get through that. So one note here, or just so everybody's aware, once we submit the assessment to HITRUST, we've done our due diligence. The assessment's been completed. My CSF's been updated. The scores have been in. It's going to take HITRUST approximately 80 to 100 days to complete their review. Once they complete their review, and that review will consist of randomly selecting controls, they're going to execute the testing that we provided. They're going to review the documentation. If they're not satisfied with what we've done, they'll contact us. They'll let us know that they have questions that we need to go in and take a look at. Sometimes it's just a matter of identifying additional evidence, or just clarifying, where you guys, are with addressing that specific control. Once we get that process complete and QA is happy with that, they'll issue a draft assessment report. Excuse me. And this is going to be basically your overall final report and your notice of certification. This report will include specific details about the assessment, about your organization. It will include the scope that we included in the assessment, as well as the findings with the scoring. And we'll go into, we won't do it today, but we will have the ability later on in another session to go through the specifics of HITRUST scoring. But it's key to know that HITRUST ultimately has the final say in what those scores are. The assessor does place, our scoring based off of what we reviewed. HITRUST will review that and approve that. But anyway, that scoring is kept in the draft report, along with the findings, any notes or anything that we need to include in that. You'll have up to 30 days to review that report and approve it. Once you approve it, it'll take them a few days to finalize that and get your final report out. When the final report is issued, and again, that may take a few months. It will take a few months after the submission. The good news is the submission date is your actual certification date. So once we go through this entire process and we get the assessment reviewed and approved, the date on the final report will be the date of submission, not the date the report was approved. So it will be backdated several months to the date that we submitted it to HITRUST. So just a couple of key things to review with where Accorian can help your organization, and what some of our value propositions are. We've successfully submitted or successfully assisted multiple clients to meet requirements of HITRUST. and other frameworks as well, HIPAA, ISO 27001, SOC 2, GDPR, et cetera. We do a lot of compliance work across the board. We leverage our on and offshore teams to bring in the right experts as needed. And again, the goal here is to be cost effective and to be able to give you guys quality and be able to address issues in a timely manner. We'll work with you to prioritize overall security requirements as well. So, we do have experts, expert security personnel on our staff to work with you on, where you need to spend the effort and the budget, and not just get things done because they're nice to haves. We want to make sure that the effort and the money you're spending is going towards improving your information security program and your stance within your organization to address vulnerabilities. We'll provide, at request, program management services for multiple activities. Not just HITRUST. We'll work with your organization through any certification framework that you're going through, as well as just improving your overall security stance. Again, if it's everything from just implementing tool sets to working with you guys on, managing personnel through your security side of your house with your SOC. So, we do have a extensive array of resources available to us for both internally and through partners. And then, we have the ability to help successfully implement multiple standards through a common framework, and our relationships with other organizations. And we do look at your organization as an extension of us, and we will recommend to you, where your effort needs to be focused. So, we will take a look at, if you're coming to us with a specific framework that you're looking at, we'll consider other frameworks. We'll look at what might be a little bit easier to achieve at the current state, and then build out a plan to get you guys through the certification process. So other than that, that's kind of a very quick, easy run through of where HITRUST is today and what Accorian services for HITRUST can offer out to your organization. We again do want to emphasize that we build custom services based off of what your organization needs are, and we're open to pretty much any situation. So at this point, I'm gonna I guess turn it over. I think Shalin, you might have some questions out there, or we'll see if anybody does have any questions.
Yeah. So one of the original questions that was asked a while ago, actually, was between SOC 2, ISO, and HITRUST, is there a gold or like a best standard? Is there a reason to choose HITRUST over the other ones?
HITRUST is the gold standard. There's no doubt about it. They have elevated the HITRUST CSF and the overall certification process to that level, and that's why you see major organizations like the major healthcare providers and all that not only supporting it and pushing it, they're part of the council that develops it and does the reviewing on it. So HITRUST is the gold standard. It's difficult. It is an expensive, process, but the level at which, your security program will be improved by going through the process is leaps and bounds over where we would see a NIST or a SOC 2 or one of the other frameworks. And again, it really depends on where you guys are with your organization and your current situation, whether or not you go down that path.
One of the other ones was, is HITRUST approachable for all organizations, or should we start somewhere and then work our way up to HITRUST?
It's approachable. We have small organizations, less than 10 personnel, because of the work they're doing. They might be doing print work, or they might be doing data validation or manipulation for a healthcare organization. So it is prescriptive. It is one of the things that HITRUST does, tout in their sales literature. that it can be sized based off of your organization, and it could be a good starting point, for your organization. The good news about that is there are combinations with HITRUST, say with a SOC 2, that you can work, down that path. And in some situations, we will talk with you about potentially, doing maybe a SOC 2 Type 2 or doing a HIP or a NIST cert prior. But again, I think it really depends on where you are from a contractual obligation and from an organizational stance. But yeah, many organizations start with HITRUST.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions that they would like to send in? You could use the QA tab at the bottom and Sean will answer them for you. If not, I think we are all set. Thank you guys for joining us today, and I hope you found this very informative. Sean, you want to sign off?
Yep. Thank you guys very much. I do appreciate it. Have a great day.